There is, in truth, no problem of life in the way we usually speak of it. And this idea sounds almost shocking, an affront to ordinary common sense. How can life not be a problem, we ask? Most people see life as nothing but problems. We feel as if we are locked in a constant struggle to solve the great puzzle of existence, from morning until night. For some, this puzzle takes a cosmic form. Why does the universe exist at all? For others, it is painfully practical. How am I going to get enough to eat? From either extreme, it seems obvious that life must be a problem. Yet the astonishing suggestion is that the thing we are wrestling with, the so-called problem of life, is not a real thing at all. It is a ghost, an illusion, something we keep fighting because we believe it exists. Much of what troubles us has this same ghost-like quality. One of the classic features of neurotic behavior is repetition. The neurotic person relives the same unsuccessful patterns again and again, caught in a loop that nothing seems able to break. Life as we ordinarily live, it becomes a similar circle. The endless rat race of birth, striving, disappointment, hope and death. It is a vicious circle, not simply because it is difficult, but because we keep trying to solve problems that are not only overwhelming, but not even real problems at all. They seem like problems, they feel like problems, but they are illusions created by the mind. And when we attack these phantom questions, we simply go round and round with no exit. Take, for example, one of the many ghosts that haunt the mind. We often say every human being has an instinct to survive. And so many people turn the entire question of life into a desperate inquiry. How am I supposed to survive? One might hesitate to relieve people of this anxiety because we fear they might lose their motivation to continue their work. But even this motivation is another ghost. We imagine some hidden force pushing us from behind, making us act, making us strive, making us continue. Yet the more honestly and clearly you observe what you are actually doing and not what you imagine is pushing you, the more these ghosts dissolve. If you simply watch the action itself, describe it plainly, see it as it is, the supposed instinct or inner command disappears. It was a story placed on top of experience, not the experience itself. So when we speak about an instinct for survival, we are not describing a real inner commander. We are describing a pattern of behavior and then inventing a ghostly explanation for it. There is no real instinct for survival in the way people usually describe it. What evidence do we actually have? Only that human beings remain alive until the moment they do not. And this is strange, because if a powerful instinct truly existed, what becomes of it the moment someone dies? Why does it not prevent its own disappearance? This reveals something important. Whenever we try to explain behavior by imagining a hidden force, a little ghost pushing from behind, we are not giving an explanation at all. We are only inserting a vague idea because we have not looked closely enough at what is really happening. This confusion appears everywhere, especially when we describe things as if they exist by themselves as solid substances acting independently. We are haunted by the idea of stuff as if there were a basic material doing things. But this sense of solidity is simply what the world looks like when we examine it too crudely. A distant nebula seen with ordinary sight appears to be a single solid star, but with a strong telescope, it becomes a spiral galaxy, a vast pattern of motion and light. The idea of stuff is what arises when our perception is too rough or our tools too weak to reveal the deeper patterns. Whenever we look carefully, we never find isolated substance. We find patterns, forms of behavior, expressions of activity. consider the human body. We might ask, what keeps its form intact? How do the organs stay inside? We can describe the skin and explain how it holds together, but soon we discover that the skin alone is not enough. The surrounding air presses on it with about 15 pounds per square inch. Without that pressure, the body would burst. So the real question becomes what truly maintains the shape of the organism. And we find that it is not the skin or the organs or the air alone. It is the relationship between what is inside the skin and what is outside. One cannot exist in its present form without the other. Look even deeper and we see that it is misleading to say the air acts this way or the organism acts that way. That kind of description imagines separate agents attacking or influencing each other. But what is really happening is a single continuing process, a relationship in which inner and outer conditions define each other. This is what Dewey and Bentley called a transaction and activity that has no separate doer and no separate done to. It is one continuous field of behavior. And so when we look closely at life, at organisms, at experience, at the universe, we find no hidden instincts, no isolated forces, no independent stuff. We see only patterns interacting with patterns, each giving shape to the other. There is no real problem of life in the way we usually use that phrase. And this idea seems almost offensive to ordinary common sense. Life not a problem. We spend our days surrounded by what we call problems. We feel trapped in a constant struggle to solve the great challenge of existence. For some people, the question is why the universe exists at all. For others, it is simply how they will manage to eat tomorrow. And from either end of the spectrum, it appears obvious that life must be a problem. Yet here comes the bold suggestion that perhaps what troubles us is nothing more than a ghost, something that appears real but vanishes when examined closely. You can see this clearly in neurotic behavior. One of its main features is repetition. A neurotic person relives the same unsuccessful patterns again and again. They seem locked inside a loop with no escape. And ordinary life often becomes the same kind of loop. The familiar circle of striving, disappointment, hope, and loss. It becomes a vicious round, not merely because it is hard, but because we keep trying to solve problems that are not actually problems. They only look like problems. When we attack impossible questions, we simply spin in circles and find no exit. Consider some of the ghosts that haunt our thinking. We often claim that human beings have an instinct for survival. Entire worldviews are built upon the question, how am I supposed to survive? Many people see life as a kind of survival contest. One might hesitate before challenging this belief because perhaps they fear people would lose their motivation to work. But even this motivation is another ghost. We imagine forces behind us pushing us, making us act, making us strive. But when we simply observe behavior as it is and describe what is actually happening, these ghosts fade away. The same happens with the so-called instinct for survival. What does that phrase really mean? Where is the evidence? People survive until they do not. And when they do not, where has this instinct gone? Why did it not act? How did this supposed force vanish at the very moment it was most needed? This shows something important. When we try to explain behavior by inventing a hidden motivator, a little inner ghost, moving the pattern, we are not actually explaining anything. We are simply covering a lack of clarity with the story. You see the same thing in perception. We talk about stuff, about solid things acting on other things. But stuff is simply what the world looks like when we have not looked closely enough. A distant nebula appears to be a single star, until a powerful telescope reveals a spiraling pattern of light. What once looked like solid material becomes a dynamic movement. When perception is crude, we see stuff. When perception becomes refined, we see patterns, behavior, relationships. Take the human body as an example. You may ask what holds it together, what keeps its shape. You can describe the skin, but quickly you discover that the skin maintains its form only because the surrounding air presses on it with constant force. Without this pressure, the body would burst. So is it the skin that holds the shape or the air. The deeper you look, the more the division collapses. John Dewey and Arthur Bentley called this a transaction, a process in which the organism and the environment are inseparable aspects of the same happening. Relationships are fundamental. A buyer cannot buy without a seller. You cannot know unless there is something to be known. Everything exists by virtue of its relationship with everything else. A doctor is not just a doctor. He is also a father, a citizen, a member of a community. We imagine a self that stands apart from these relationships, a solid core moving through them unchanged. But that imagination creates another ghost, a being separate from the network that defines him. In truth, he is inseparable from his relationships. The organism is simply the behavior of the field, the environment in which it arises. This does not mean the organism is passive or controlled. The organism is part of the environment, and the environment is part of the organism. They create each other. There is no clear division, no doer and no done, to no attacker and no victim. There is only a single event unfolding. When we finally begin to describe what is happening instead of imagining ghosts behind it, the world becomes clearer, simpler, and more direct. And in that clarity, something surprising appears. Life is not a problem. It is not a contest between ourselves and what surrounds us. That entire picture is an illusion, a fundamentally false way of seeing. And once we begin to see that life is not a contest between a solitary me and a hostile everything else, an entirely new dimension of understanding starts to open. The belief in a separate self, a little conscious island, surrounded by an ocean of forces that must be controlled, resisted, or defeated, is revealed not as a truth, but as a habit of perception. A very old habit reinforced by language, by culture, by the way we draw lines and carve up experience into objects that seem to stand alone. Yet when examined closely, nothing in the world truly stands alone. The wind cannot blow if there is no tree or field to move through. A flame cannot burn without oxygen, without fuel, without space around it. A thought cannot arise without a mind, and a mind cannot exist without a world that provides sensations, memories, interactions. Everything is woven into everything else like threads in a tapestry that has no beginning and no separate pieces. But we are so accustomed to imagining life as something we do, as a project we must manage, that it seems almost heretical to say that life is something that is happening spontaneously, effortlessly, and that we are simply expressions of that happening. Waves do not struggle to become waves. Trees do not try to grow leaves. Stars do not manage to shine. They do what they are because what they are is the universe itself in motion. The great frustration of the human condition comes from imagining that we are exceptions to this natural flow. We try to stand outside of life and fix it, manipulate it, control it as though we were cosmic engineers. Yet the very energy we call our will, our effort, or our decisions is itself part of the same natural movement. Even the sense of being separate is just another ripple in the ocean of experience. And here lies the strange liberation. Once we stop forcing ourselves into the role of an isolated doer, we discover that many of the so-called problems of life dissolve on their own. They were never problems in the first place, only conflicts created by a false premise. If you imagine yourself as a wave fighting the ocean, your existence becomes exhausting. But once you see that the wave is simply the ocean expressing itself, the struggle ends. Not because the wave disappears, but because the illusion of separation does. This does not mean passivity or indifference. It does not mean surrendering to fate in the sense of resignation. Rather, it means recognizing that the energy with which we act, choose love, build, create, or let go is the same energy that moves the stars. Our actions are not imposed upon life. They are life just as much as thunder or a heartbeat or the blooming of a flower. The ghost disappears when you stop chasing it. In the same way, the imaginary problem of life disappears when you stop dividing the world into me and not me, into inside and outside, into self and environment. What remains is a single flowing process in which the observer and the observed arise together like two sides of a coin. This is why so many philosophical traditions return again and again to the idea of unity, not as a poetic metaphor, but as a literal description of how things are. The lungs breathe air, but the air is part of the atmosphere, which is part of the rotation of the planet, which depends on the gravity of the sun, which depends on forces and patterns that extend across the entire cosmos. To be you is to be an expression of the totality, not separate from it, but inseparable from the infinite web of conditions that make your existence possible. And when this is understood, life stops being a puzzle to solve. It becomes something far more intimate, a dance. Not a dance you perform, but a dance you are. The rhythm of breathing, the rise and fall of emotion, the tides of thought, the cycles of joy and sorrow, all of them are movements of the same universal music. There is nothing to overcome, nothing to fix, nothing to defeat. There is only the continuous unfolding of reality in which you are a participant, not by choice, but by nature. And when the ghost of separation vanishes, what remains is simplicity. The astonishing clarity that life was never a problem at all, but a phenomenon, a happening, a mystery to be experienced rather than solved.